Meet Greta Dudko, our first chilling entry. Originally from Lithuania, this immigrant built a stellar reputation as a dedicated nurse in Ireland. Her career path was glowing, marked by a deep commitment to healing others. But that professional success crumbled under a secret addiction, leading to her dismissal for being intoxicated on the clock. This sudden layoff triggered a dark and rapid personal collapse. Married to Delilah Dudko with a young son, her domestic life was already fracturing. Seeking support, Greta's mother, Anna Batien, traveled from Lithuania to Ireland to assist with the child. While Greta battled her inner demons, Anna stepped up as the boy's primary caregiver. Home life became a powder keg as Greta's pill habit intensified dangerously. Mixing booze with potent sedative prescriptions, she reached a breaking point during a Christmas Eve row in 2010. During that heated exchange, Anna spat out insults that cut Greta to the core. She trashed Greta's parenting and threatened to snatch the boy back to Lithuania. Drowning in a toxic cocktail of chemicals and rage, Greta finally snapped at the threat. The shouting turned into a bloodbath when Greta slammed her mother's skull against the wall. Using a glass bottle to finish the job, she left Anna lifeless. Can substances truly erase one's humanity? Once the violence ended, the nurse dialed 911 for help. She initially staged it as a tragic tumble, but the forensic team saw the truth. The horrific injuries proved this wasn't a fall, it was a brutal, intentional assault. Investigators scoured the room, finding evidence of a savage and deliberate attack. Medical experts confirmed multiple high-impact strikes that no accidental trip could ever explain. Under police questioning, Greta confessed to the slaying but claimed she was provoked. She focused on the insults to her motherhood and the fear of losing her son. Her lawyers later argued that the chemical mix in her system had short-circuited her brain. Experts testified about the perfect storm of pills and booze which can trigger wild, unstoppable impulses. Greta eventually stood trial for the unthinkable act of ending her mother's life. The first legal showdown ended in a stalemate as the jury remained deadlocked. That hung jury forced a second, grueling 11-day trial in the search for justice. Prosecutors presented damning physical evidence of the calculated nature of the fatal wounds. While they detailed the deadly argument, the defense clung to the chemically compromised theory. By 2014, after those 11 days of testimony, jurors returned a guilty verdict. They saw through her excuses. The panel decided Greta acted with cold intent, regardless of what substances she had consumed. In Ireland, such a heinous conviction carries a mandatory sentence of life behind bars. She was locked away, and her 2018 legal appeal was swiftly rejected. High Court judges found no error significant enough to overturn the original ruling. As of 2026, Greta remains in the DOA Center at Dublin's high-security Mountjoy campus. Next, we look at a predator who struck twice. Nicole Flagg. In 2015, Ohio was rocked when 43-year-old Nicole allegedly slew her mother, Myrvinia Lowe. This wasn't the first time Nicole had blood on her hands. In 2003, she'd served 8 years for the robbery and slaying of Jeffrey Brown. Myrvinia Lowe was a beloved hospital worker, described as the family's brightest light. She left behind 2 children, Nicole and her brother, Maurice Allen. On April 10, 2015, the peace of Myrvinia's residence was shattered. Nicole arrived at the house, and a confrontation ended with Myrvinia being stabbed repeatedly. The motive was simple and cold. She wanted her mother's money. Nicole looted the home of cash and car keys, fleeing in a Lexus for 2 weeks. Following the carnage, Nicole desperately tried to bleach the evidence away, frantically scrubbing the crime scene. But forensic experts would soon unmask the truth, even as the corpse sat undiscovered for days. Maurice Allen, spooked by a bizarre and unsettling voicemail, was the one who finally called for help. Cops entered the home and found her cold corpse. Multiple blade wounds scarred her remains, and the air reeked of a failed, clumsy attempt to sanitize the room. What drives a paroled felon back to such depravity? Nicole didn't turn herself in. She simply vanished. For 12 days, she lurked in the shadows, while detectives built a mountain of evidence against her. They scrutinized every bloodstain, grilled witnesses, and reconstructed the suspect's movements with surgical precision. On April 22nd, the fugitive finally surrendered, facing charges for matricide, theft, and destroying a crime scene. The harrowing details were laid bare before the Hamilton County Common Pleas Court. Prosecutors displayed grisly photos of the puncture wounds and the pathetic smears where she tried to hide the blood. Maurice Allen's emotional testimony painted a picture of his mother's life and the dread that led to the discovery. Investigators proved she had looted the house, suggesting a motive born from pure, cold-blooded greed. Her history of near-identical violence emerged, proving this wasn't a mistake, but a terrifying lifelong pattern. In December 2016, she was convicted. Her crimes included aggravated murder, desecrating a human body, robbery, and blatant evidence tampering. Each conviction reflected a different facet of the nightmare Nicole had inflicted upon her own family. Judge Martin delivered the sentence on January 9, 2017. Sentenced to life plus 15 years without any hope of parole, the killer stood up to speak her piece. With chilling detachment, she looked at the court and insisted she hadn't laid a finger on her mother. The DNA evidence said otherwise. Maurice Allen then addressed the court, his voice heavy with the weight of loss. He spoke of a shattered family and a mother whose kindness was stolen by a monster they once loved. Today, Nicole Flagg remains locked away within the cold walls of the Dayton Correctional Institution in Ohio. She will never breathe free air again. This case highlights how a history of violence creates a roadmap for the legal system to follow. While the handcuffs brought closure to the family, the empty chair at dinner remains a haunting scar. Elsewhere, a different family was hiding a toxic secret that would eventually end in a bloodbath. In Brisbane, Australia, 22-year-old Simona Zaparovska lived a lie with the woman she called her mother. They both immigrated from Macedonia to Australia. To the outside world, Radica was the definition of a doting, selfless, and incredibly kind parent. But inside their home, the atmosphere was curdling into something far more sinister and dangerous. Weeks before the horror, Radica warned a journalist that things at home had taken a dark, unpleasant turn. On October 28, 2016, Simona crept into her mother's room while she lay sleeping. She held jagged pieces of synthetic timber. As Radica slept, Simona swung the wood repeatedly, crushing her mother's face and fracturing her skull. The victim died from extreme blunt force trauma, the sheer violence suggesting an explosion of pure rage. After the slaughter, Simona dialed emergency services. She spun a frantic web of lies about a mysterious intruder who had broken in and slaughtered her mother. Police arrived and began hunting for the intruder. But the crime scene was screaming a different story, and investigators immediately noticed the glaring inconsistencies. What madness makes a child slaughter their own mother? Forensics soon uncovered a smoking gun. The bloodied pieces of synthetic wood were discovered hidden inside Simona's very own bedroom. If a stranger had done this, the murder weapons wouldn't be sitting in the daughter's closet. Every drain and entry point was bone dry. No intruder had ever set foot in that house that night. All clues led back inside that house. Cops dragged Simona in for interrogation. She stubbornly clung to that phantom intruder fantasy throughout questioning. She spun a tale of a break-in, but the crime scene screamed otherwise. They grilled her until the truth broke. Simona was finally charged. The 3-week trial at Brisbane Supreme Court saw the prosecution dismantle her lies with cold forensics. 2019 saw the jury seal her fate with a guilty verdict. Justice Lyons labeled her fictional home invader story as a complex fabrication. The judge mourned Radica, a devoted mother who met an unthinkable, undeserved end. Simona got life, with 20 long years to rot before any parole chance. Then, a shocker. DNA tests proved Simona was actually adopted, not biological family. She shared no blood with Radica, a secret hidden from her since childhood. Did discovering her Macedonian roots or identity lies trigger this domestic nightmare? People wondered. Why she did it remains a mystery. By 2022, the estate battle began. The court stripped her of every cent from her mother's inheritance. It's a simple rule. You can't profit from the person you killed. Her appeal failed. As of 2026, she's still behind Queensland bars. Our next horror story follows a mind twisted by dark, false convictions. Patricia Labozier lived in a fog of mental illness, battling severe psychosis and terrifying mood swings. She spent years cycling through psychiatric hospitals for help. A dark delusion consumed her, that her own mother, Julia Bradshaw, was conducting demonic rituals. Patricia heard ghostly warnings from her dead brother. These weren't facts, just the cruel shadows cast by her broken mind. Late October 2000 found Patricia living with 67-year-old Julia in Massachusetts. Under the cover of night, Patricia crept in and repeatedly stabbed her sleeping mother. Afterward, she dialed 911 herself, coldly admitting she had just butchered her mom. She was just fed up with Julia. Her confession was chillingly blunt and totally heartless. Cops arrived to a bloodbath. Julia Bradshaw was gone, riddled with knife wounds. They cuffed Patricia instantly. Between the call and the confession, the case was shut. The bloody evidence confirmed her story. The trial wasn't about who done it, but whether her madness excused the murder. Her long history of psychiatric treatment was undeniable and well documented. To Patricia, those lies were gospel. How does justice handle a killer driven by demons? She skipped the trial and took a plea deal instead. By September 2002, she copped to second-degree murder and other charges. This deal admitted the crime while letting her mental state soften the blow. Judge Carney handed down life plus 5 years, all to be served behind bars simultaneously. It left the door cracked for parole if she could ever prove she wasn't a threat. Decades passed. Patricia stayed locked up, receiving constant psychiatric care. In 2020, she finally faced the board. Her words were haunting. She called her crime unfortunate, but still spat that her mother was a lifelong enemy. The poison in her mind hadn't fully cleared, even after all those years. 2025 brought her back for another shot at freedom. Now 63 and 23 years in, a shrink claimed she was no longer a danger. Her advanced age and medicated state supposedly lowered the risk of another explosion. Yet, the board stayed wary. The dark delusions that pushed Patricia to strike her own mother still festered within her mind. Years of therapy failed to scrub away those sinister fixations, leaving the parole board's decision hanging by a thread. A few officials argued she'd changed enough, claiming keeping her locked away was now a pointless exercise. However, skeptics feared her lingering madness made her a walking time bomb, resulting in a razor-thin rejection of her freedom. Per state mandates, her next chance at liberty won't arrive until 2027. Julia Bradshaw's kin fought tooth and nail against her release. Terrified, she remained a lethal threat to society. In 2026, Patricia Labozier stays behind bars, a haunting reminder of how easily mental decay and violence intertwine. A different tragedy would soon crawl out from the shadows of homelessness and desperation. Since 2008, Rebecca Olenchuk and her mother, Kimberly Venos, drifted through life after their home was snatched away by foreclosure. Their world had shrunk to a cramped, makeshift shack tucked away in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Life was brutal. That meager hut offered a roof but zero warmth or dignity. Rebecca slung plates as a waitress, obsessively hoarding tips to buy their way into a real apartment and a decent life. This was her ticket out of misery, but money soon turned their bond into a powder keg. Every cent from her shifts was painstakingly stashed away for their future. Just as the move-in costs were within reach, she realized Kimberly had squandered every single dollar. Her dreams and months of grueling labor vanished into thin air. When challenged, Kimberly stubbornly clung to their squalor, refusing to even dream of a better life elsewhere. On October 17, 2010, Rebecca waited for the silence of sleep to strike. Grabbing a bat, she rained 10 to 15 crushing blows onto her mother's skull while she lay helpless. The sheer brutality left Kimberly's skull shattered in pieces. With her mother broken, Rebecca doused the shack in kerosene and struck a match. She padlocked the exit from the outside, ensuring the flaming hut became a tomb. Can poverty truly breed such monsters? Miraculously, Kimberly clung to life amidst the smoke and blood. She crawled from the inferno, and when rescuers found her, she found the strength to whisper. "My daughter did this," she gasped. Her final breath spent naming her own killer before succumbing to the smoke and wounds. This dying declaration became the smoking gun that sealed Rebecca's fate. After sparking the blaze, Rebecca vanished, triggering a frantic manhunt across state lines. Cops finally cornered her in Tennessee, where she coldly admitted to the entire horrific ordeal. She blamed her rage on the stolen cash and Kimberly's refusal to abandon their shack. Her chilling account lined up perfectly with the charred, bloody ruins of the crime scene. Forensics proved the bat and the blaze were a lethal pair, leading to a June 2011 trial. Foregoing a jury, a judge weighed the evidence and the troubling results of her psych evaluations. The verdict was grim, guilty of first-degree murder and arson, though shrouded in mental illness. This label meant she was a killer, but one driven by a fractured and unstable mind. On October 13, 2011, the judge finally handed down her permanent fate. For the slaughter of her mother, Rebecca was handed a life sentence with zero hope for freedom. Another 12.5 to 25 years for arson were piled on, ensuring she would die behind bars. The prosecution hammered home that the trail of evidence was simply too massive to ignore. Her lawyers tried to paint a picture of a woman broken by stress and mental decay. Today, Rebecca Olenchuk rots in Cambridge Springs, a permanent resident of the prison system. A new horror unfolded involving an aged victim and a desperate attempt to hide the truth. In January 2024, Wellington, New Zealand, became the stage for 53-year-old Julia Delhoney's dark betrayal. At 79, Helen was a fragile soul who relied entirely on her daughter's mercy. Their bond had soured into something toxic, fueled by a deep, secretive betrayal of trust and money. The trial unmasked the truth. A greedy daughter had been bleeding her mother's life, savings dry. A dark secret Helen stumbled upon only days before the nightmare began. In January 2024, Julia ruthlessly bludgeoned her own mother to death. The assault was relentless. Helen's body broke under a hail of repeated blows. Those horrific wounds whispered a tale of pure, lethal determination. Helen succumbed to the carnage. Then, Julia frantically tried to scrub the truth. She bleached the crime scene, desperate to erase every bloody fingerprint left behind. Staging the room, she feigned innocence. But soon, investigators sensed something foul. Officers responded to what was first described as a very suspicious tragedy. Clues didn't add up. The forensic reality shattered her flimsy alibi completely. Detectives turned their cold spotlight directly onto the daughter, Julia. They scoured their fractured bond, meticulously analyzing bank statements and private texts. Evidence was tested. What madness drives a child to slaughter their own parent? Julia was indicted for murder. The case rocked Wellington's High Court. Courtroom air grew heavy as prosecutors detailed the savage trauma Helen endured. Jurors watched in silence as Julia's desperate cover-up attempt was laid bare. Testimony revealed a sacred bond twisted into a cold, lethal betrayal. Julia stonewalled, refusing blame. The jury absorbed every chilling detail over the trial. After intense deliberation, July 2025 brought the final, crushing judgment: guilty. The evidence proved she was indeed her mother's cold-blooded killer. With the verdict in, Justice Churchman prepared to hand down the final punishment. Come September 5, 2025, Julia received life, 18 years minimum for preying on her helpless mother. No mercy was warranted. The judge found zero mitigating reasons for leniency. Even after the verdict, Julia's chilling refusal to admit her guilt remained. 18 long years must pass before she even glimpses the hope of freedom. Grieving relatives shared the crushing impact of Helen's violent and sudden end. Her absence shattered their world. She was the matriarch they all adored. Realizing her own flesh and blood was the killer made healing impossible. They must live knowing their beloved Helen died by Julia's hand. Currently, in 2026, Julia Delhoney rots in a New Zealand prison cell. Parole is impossible until 2043, when she'll be in her early 70s. Fascinated by these dark dives into the world's most shocking true crimes? Smash that subscribe button and ring the bell to never miss a nightmare. Next, a deadly confrontation ending in a remote, desolate body dump. Rebecca Mansuri had called San Diego home for over 30 long years. Born in Jordan, she lived with 79-year-old Maria in Serra Mesa. Their domestic bond had decayed into a toxic, volatile, and dangerous mess. Fury flared constantly, fueled by a dark undercurrent of addiction and rage. September 23, 2013. A screaming match turned into a fatal homicide. Amidst the savage fury, Maria was slowly and brutally strangled. A garage bicycle tube was the weapon, providing a grisly forensic link. With Maria dead, Gazal chose a sinister cover-up over calling for help. She chose a life of cold, calculated deception. She dumped the body near Verona. By October 2nd, the remains surfaced. That desolate spot was picked specifically for its silence and its secrets. Nature and scavengers had already begun their gruesome work, leaving the corpse ravaged and torn by local wildlife. Forensics teams combed the grim scene, desperate to identify the remains and unmask the horror that had occurred. The trail quickly led to Gazal. The chilling question remained: what monster dumps their own mother like literal trash? Under intense police questioning, Gazal finally cracked and admitted to ditching the body in that desolate, remote spot. Even so, she swore up and down that she wasn't the one who actually ended her mother's life. She spun a tale about finding her mother dead and panicking. But the cold forensic science told a darker story. Bruises around the neck screamed foul play, proving someone had deliberately squeezed the life out of the poor woman. Hauling a corpse to the wilderness reeks of guilt. By January 2015, she finally faced a judge. The state painted a disturbing picture of a toxic bond between mother and daughter that had reached its breaking point. The courtroom watched in shock as the grim details of Maria's final moments and her undignified disposal were revealed. They argued that the act of choking her and then hiding the body was evidence of cold-blooded, intentional murder. Lawyers tried to claim it was a tragic accident, a heated argument that simply spiraled way out of control. It didn't take long for the jury to return a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. The decision confirmed Gazal knew exactly what she was doing when she took that life and hid the secret. On March 6, 2015, the hammer fell. She was handed 25 years to life behind bars. This meant she'd rot in a cell for at least a quarter century before even dreaming of a parole hearing. Family members wept in court, with Anise calling Gazal's actions nothing short of demonic and completely inhuman. The relatives were left reeling, unable to fathom how a child could treat their own flesh and blood so cruelly. Tossing her mother's corpse out for scavengers in the wild was a level of heartlessness that shocked the world. Throughout the entire trial, Gazal sat there like stone, showing zero regret for her mother's gruesome death. Fast forward to 2026, and Gazal Mansuri is still locked away in a California state penitentiary. Though she normally wouldn't see daylight until the late 2030s, California's laws for older inmates might change that. Being over 50 during her sentence means she could potentially walk free as early as 2034 if she behaves. Our next story is a descent into madness, where mental illness pushed someone to commit the unthinkable. Delilah Evans grew up in a world of shadows, her childhood marred by constant struggle and pain. Voices screamed in her head, and delusions twisted her reality into a terrifying, unrecognizable landscape. At just 17 years old, her internal demons were left to run wild, virtually ignored by everyone around her. She lived with Sonia Riang, a disabled mother who relied entirely on others just to survive. Christmas 2011 turned into a nightmare when Delilah launched a savage assault on her own mother. It was a bloodbath. Sonia was knifed over 100 times in a frenzied, endless, and brutal attack. Trapped by her own body, Sonia had zero chance of fighting back or crawling away from the slaughter. Once the life left her mother, Delilah calmly started scrubbing the blood away to erase the carnage. After tidying up the crime scene, she bolted, but cops caught her at a shop and made the arrest. Delilah told a bizarre story about her mother performing dark, wicked rituals that she had to stop. She was convinced that Sonia was part of something dangerous, something that threatened her very existence. Her words were the ramblings of a broken mind, a total break from the real world. When a person's mind snaps and leads to murder, how on earth does the law decide their fate? A battery of psychological tests were ordered to figure out exactly what was happening inside Delilah's head. Doctors found a volatile mix of mood swings and deep-seated psychosis that clouded her every thought. It was clear she was in the middle of a full-blown psychotic break when she picked up that knife. By 2018, the court had to decide if a woman this broken could even be held responsible. Prosecutors bombarded the jury with the gory details, highlighting the sheer overkill of the stabbing. The defense countered with the medical proof of her shattered and damaged psyche, The verdict was guilty but mentally ill, a decision that recognized her crime while admitting her mind was fractured. By April 5th, back in 2018, Judge Creddy handed Delilah a permanent stay behind bars, calling her savage assault nothing short of barbaric. Sonia's kin filled the courtroom, screaming for retribution and refusing to let claims of insanity excuse the carnage. But the nightmare didn't conclude there. By 2021, high-level judges were picking apart the original verdict. Detectives had crossed lines during Delilah's interrogation, violating her basic rights and tainting the entire investigation. State lawyers relied on testimonies that never should have seen the light of day in a fair legal proceeding. This blatant legal foul play wiped her record clean, sparking a fresh legal battle in 2022. Once more, 12 strangers would be tasked with deciding if she was truly a monster. Come December 2023, she dodged a second trial by admitting to second-degree slaughter under a plea of insanity. Her new fate, 20 to 40 years, minus the 12 already spent in a cell. Next, a blood-curdling tale of greed. Meet Candace Craig. In May 2023, the 46-year-old shared a Maryland home with her elderly mother, 71-year-old Margaret. Bitter arguments over disappearing cash poisoned the atmosphere of their shared residence. Candace was secretly draining the old woman's retirement funds and government checks for her own gain. Once Margaret caught the thief in her own home, a deadly confrontation erupted between mother and daughter. That single argument spiraled into a horror story that would haunt the state of Maryland for years. As the shouting intensified over the stolen money, Candace's hands found her mother's throat and squeezed. Margaret breathed her last as the life was forced out of her. Then, things got truly demonic. Instead of calling 911 or digging a hidden grave in the woods, she chose a path of pure depravity. She reached for a chainsaw, cold-bloodedly carving up the woman who had given her life. The remains were tossed onto a backyard grill to be incinerated a sickeningly methodical way to erase the evidence. Bagged-up pieces of Margaret sat rotting in the basement while Candace went about her daily life upstairs. She even dragged her own child, Celia Hardy, into the gore, turning a murder into a multi-generational atrocity. This gruesome secret might have stayed buried if the police hadn't received a desperate tip for a checkup. A routine safety visit by officers turned into a descent into a literal house of horrors. Even seasoned detectives were shaken by the carnage. Is money really worth such a soul-crushing betrayal? Piece by piece, investigators reconstructed the stomach-turning reality of Candace's weekend of butchery. Celia Hardy flipped, becoming the state's ultimate weapon against her own mother. While she missed the initial killing, she admitted to helping feed her grandmother's remains to the flames. Her gruesome story chilled the courtroom, but the forensic evidence proved every sickening detail was absolutely true. Lab tests confirmed the basement scraps were Margaret, proving she had been sliced and charred as described. Over 8 intense days in November 2024, the world watched the grim details unfold in court. Jurors listened to Celia's haunting confession and the traumatic reports from the first officers on the scene. Visuals of the butchery were displayed as lawyers argued Candace killed purely to keep the cash flowing. Prosecutors highlighted the monstrous lengths she went to just to make her mother's body disappear. With such a mountain of gore and a daughter's betrayal, the defense was essentially fighting a lost cause. The verdict was swift, guilty of cold-blooded, premeditated homicide. Along with evidence tampering, she earned life plus 18 years in February 2025, with no hope of release. This was the steep price for murdering her mother and treating the body like literal trash. The judge spared no words describing the sheer depravity inflicted upon poor Margaret in her final moments. To be choked and charred by your own child for a few bucks is the ultimate betrayal. To Candace, her mother wasn't a person anymore. She was just a paycheck that needed to keep coming. The choice of power tools and fire proved a desperate desire to erase Margaret's very existence from Earth. Today, in 2026, Candace sits in a Maryland prison cell, likely haunted by her own cruelty. This story went viral because of the sheer savagery of the grill and the pathetic greed behind it. Next, we pivot from raw violence to a masterfully manipulated scheme of cold, calculated deception. Enter Jennifer Pan, a young woman raised in the quiet suburbs of Markham, Ontario. Born to Vietnamese immigrants, she lived under a roof where perfection was the only acceptable standard. Bich Ha and Hue Han Pan demanded total excellence, scripting a life their daughter grew to despise. Suffocating under their rules, Jennifer constructed a massive fortress of lies, even forging her school reports. She staged a fake college career for years, living a phantom life that her parents completely believed. As she matured, the weight of this complex deception began to fracture her manufactured reality. Forbidden from dating, Jennifer started a secret, illicit romance with a man her parents strictly banned. Caught between their iron will and her own desires, the internal pressure reached a terrifying peak. Jennifer eventually made a cold-blooded choice that would send massive shockwaves through her entire community. She decided to eliminate her own parents, hiring a team of hitmen in November 2010. With her ex-boyfriend Daniel Wong, she recruited a crew to unleash a nightmare at her home. On November 8th, gunmen invaded the house and executed her mother, Bichha, in cold blood. Her father survived a bullet to the head, narrowly escaping the hit staged as a robbery. She played the bound, traumatized victim perfectly, hiding her role as the mastermind behind the bloodshed. However, her father's survival became her undoing after he woke up with a hauntingly clear memory. He told detectives that the masked intruders moved through the house with an eerie, familiar confidence. The robbery narrative soon fell apart, and the police turned their suspicious gaze toward the daughter. Under the heat of interrogation, her story crumbled into a mess of glaring, suspicious contradictions. Soon, a mountain of digital evidence surfaced, linking her directly to the heart of the assassination plot. Records and witness accounts proved Jennifer wasn't a victim. She was the cold-hearted architect of the tragedy. At the 2014 trial, the world watched as her decade of deception was finally exposed. Prosecutors argued she viewed her parents' deaths as the ultimate price for her personal liberation. They presented concrete evidence connecting her to the logistical planning of the home invasion. Her motive was a toxic mix of wanting freedom and a share of the insurance money. In a devastating courtroom moment, her surviving father stood up to testify against his own child. In 2015, she received a life sentence for murder, with no parole for 25 years. Maintaining her innocence, she launched a desperate legal battle to overturn the verdict and be freed. By June 2024, the High Court ordered a new trial regarding her first-degree murder conviction. Regardless of that ruling, she remains a convicted criminal for trying to have her father murdered. As of 2026, she remains behind bars in Ontario, waiting for her next date with destiny. This wasn't the only time a young girl's secret love ended in a family bloodbath. Jasmine Richardson was born on October 21, 1993, in the town of Medicine Hat. Raised in a typical middle-class home, she lived a seemingly normal life with her younger brother. She was a bright student until the dark world of Gothic online subcultures began to pull her in. Her identity shifted as she dove into macabre communities, changing into someone her parents barely recognized. At 12, Jasmine began a dark affair with 23-year-old Jeremy Stanny. Their massive age gap made the bond predatory and twisted. Once her folks caught wind, they were beyond horrified. They cut her off, locking the girl down. But to a defiant 12-year-old, these rules felt like a prison. Instead of yielding, the pair started plotting a savage, permanent solution. On April 23, 2006, Jeremy crept into the Richardson home. What followed would scar the town forever. Mark and Deborah were ambushed and stabbed, bleeding out in their own home. Even her little brother didn't survive. One night, her entire family just vanished. The lovers fled, leaving behind a crime scene reeking of cold, calculated malice. Can a 12-year-old truly fathom the cold finality of murder? Tips led to their capture. Jeremy boasted about the butchery. Chillingly, the duo orchestrated the massacre weeks before. They plotted to eliminate her family obstacles. Texts confirmed the hit. How to judge a child, age 12. She faced juvenile justice only. Identity hidden during her 2007 trial. Evidence exposed her role in the slaughter. Defense blamed age and his dark influence. Convicted of 3 counts of triple murder. Sentence: 10 years in intensive psychiatric care. Maximum penalty under youth laws applied. Focus: mental healing over prison time. She supposedly wept for her family later. Freed May 2016. Debt paid. Past erased. Her records are sealed. She's now a ghost with hidden tracks. Adult Jeremy received a crushing sentence. Life behind bars. No parole for decades. Next, Norah Jackson's nightmare of injustice. Trauma hit early, when her father vanished. She struggled in Memphis with her mother. Their bond shattered during her teen years. Fights over rules and illegal substances escalated. Jennifer was discovered slaughtered on June 5th. Over 50 stabs, a total bloodbath. Police instantly targeted the daughter, Norah. Her partying that night raised red flags. Timelines were scrutinized. The case was flimsy. No forensic trail linked her to murder. No prints or DNA. Charges proceeded anyway. They claimed she killed for the inheritance. The trial began in February 2009. Theory: she butchered Jennifer for cold cash. Guilty without DNA? The jury gambled. Verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. 20 years given for killing her protector. Norah screamed her innocence until the end. Regardless, the prison doors locked tight. A hidden secret would shatter the verdict. Prosecutors buried proof that favored her. Alibis and other suspects were illegally hidden. Misconduct exposed. Her legal team struck back. Conviction overturned in 2014. Suppressed facts had tainted the entire trial. Norah took an Alford plea to finish it. In a shocking twist, Norah Jackson walked free in August 2016 after taking a manslaughter deal to avoid a murder conviction. Now, free, Norah lives a life of total secrecy. She still swears she had no part in her mother's death. Without any physical proof linking her to the scene, her guilt remains a haunting question. Dirty tactics by the prosecution blew the case wide open, exposing a terrifying failure of justice. The tragedy left Jennifer Jackson's family bitterly divided and broken. Half the family brands her a killer, while others fear the true predator escaped. Even now, in 2026, the identity of the person who took Jennifer's life is a mystery. That plea deal brands her a criminal, yet she refuses to admit guilt. Hidden evidence and a total lack of forensics suggest she was potentially framed by the state. That is our story for today. Thanks for watching. Click here for another chilling mystery.